Welcome back. Now in this segment we want to look at the Isaac narrative, 25-26, the Jacob narrative, 27 to 37, and then we'll get into the Joseph narrative. So, Isaac, the child of the promise, was born by supernatural intervention. It's an amazing story. He was a miracle baby. In time, he, Abram's son, his only son, the son whom he loved, was offered back to God in sacrifice. We get to the Jacob narrative, Genesis 27 to just the first verse of chapter 37. There's another example of biblical biography, no airbrushing here. God's absolute grace upon Jacob was announced before he was even born. He, and not his elder brother, as would be expected, will be the one through whom God advances this promise project. And the old supplanter was also a practiced deceiver. He cons his age-blinded father for a blessing as well as Esau's birthright. In chapter 27, as Esau sobered up and realizes his folly, he hates his brother all the more. As the story goes on, the situation at home grows unbearable, and so Jacob heads out for the old country, Haran, place of refuge for the time being until Esau cools down. But in the meantime, Rebekah is concerned. He's gone off to college at Haran. He might find a bride from among the daughters of Heth, and so he persuades Joe to renew Jake's blessing and send him to her home area to find a bride. Well, the sidebar of this story is, remember, Esau is bent on getting even with Dad, and he stacks up Canaanite wives, even adding one from Ishmael's family in 28:9. So this then is the setting for the renewal of the promise to Jacob. Jacob's overnighting somewhere between Beersheba and Haran, and he has a dream. There's a ladder, there are these angels, and Yahweh himself saying, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham your father, and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give to you and to your offspring. Your offspring will be like the dust of the earth. You'll spread abroad to the west, to the east, to the north, to the south. And in you and in your offspring shall all the families of the earth be blessed. You get it? The bottom line of the promise to Abraham. Reiterated here. Behold, I am with you. There's this Emmanuel theology. Immanuel, God is with us. I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back to this land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Chapter 28, verses 13 to 15. And then, after the 14-year challenging sojourn with his uncle Laban, the promised covenant is reaffirmed once again in 31:3. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your relatives, and I will be with you. Here's that Emmanuel motif that we're going to see over and over again. And, of course, Jake is confronted by this theophany. This is not just a dream. He's left with physical evidence that this wasn't just a pipe dream. On top of that, he gets his name changed from Yaakov to Israel. He fights with God. Jake learned that self-esteem, self-confidence, the ability to really, spiel a yarn, doesn't amount to that much compared with the living presence and the power of God. Well, as the story winds down, Jake dies in Egypt, not at home. He makes the family promise that they'll get him home. And his prophetic blessing in chapter 49 sets up expectations for the whole tribe. And one that pops out is the blessing of Judah in verse 10. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes, my translation gives me. Until Shiloh comes, and to him, Shiloh, shall be the obedience of the peoples. So what's going on here? What is Shiloh? And you may notice in your margins of your English Bibles as we press ahead a bit. So the last 14 chapters tell the story of God's blessing Israel, and Israel's being a blessing to the nations. The narrative action begins with some family dysfunction. You've got parental favoritism, sibling rivalry turned dark to hatred. Joe's dream revelations seem rather conceited and self-aggrandizing. The siblings feel that they've been put down by this upstart, and so they plot revenge. In chapter 37, 18 to 36, they're putting this plan together just to get rid of him. And chapter 37 of Genesis ends leaving the reader or the hearer on the edge of their seat. Joe's been sold by Midianite traders to one Potiphar, captain of the Pharaoh's secret service, and part of the Pharaoh's bodyguards. Is this good news or is it bad news? We're going to have to wait for the next episode, because next week the program has been preempted by this Judah and Tamar story. But the following week, the program will be back on schedule, and we can see what happens next. So, now, 2 weeks later, we're reminded that previously on Joe's improbable adventure, Joe was taken to Egypt, where he was purchased by Captain Potiphar. And then in chapter 39, verses 2 through 6, we learn of God's providential care for Joe. And as we'll learn, for God, the care that God exercises for his covenant community as well. Chapter 39 focuses on a powerful account of victory over relentless temptation. It would seem that facing it for what it was in verse 9 is really key to Joe's overcoming. He says in verse 9, how then could I do this great evil and sin against God? You see, instead of toying with it, he named it for what it was, and then he removed himself from it. And admittedly, at first glance, it didn't turn out so well. But in short order, Joe was made trustee at the prison. Being a trustee is nice. At the prison, maybe not so nice. But watch what's happening. God's positioning Joe for a strategic opportunity in chapter 40 as he gives testimony to God's amazing power. So in chapter 41, Joe gets conscripted to serve Pharaoh, and by the end of the chapter, Gentiles are coming to Joe for provision. So, fast forward to chapter 45. When the conflict that began this narrative is resolved and the family is reconciled and reunited, they stay in Egypt, where they're protected and they prosper. Jacob dies, then Joseph, but the story's not over. The very next verse continues the narrative. Now these are the names of the sons of Israel who came to Egypt with Jacob. They came each one with his household. And you know, I'm reading on in the continuous narrative, but those last lines came not out of Genesis, but Exodus chapter 1, which we will get into next time. So, see you in a bit.